The Broncos last year were a perfect example of you bring in somebody new, you do something big that in no way, shape, or form guarantees any level of success whatsoever. Because 2022 for the Broncos, this is not overreaction, hyperbole, none of that shit. It was an unmitigated disaster from basically start to finish. They go and make the huge trade for Russell Wilson and totally rolled snake eyes on it. He sucked. And as is so often the case in Seattle, like people used to make excuses about the offensive line or this and that. No, you know what? At some point in time, it's on the quarterback. And as much as you might want to make excuses about injuries or this or that, no, you make that type of deal for that type of quarterback that's been a 9-time Pro Bowler, give him that type of fucking money. He needs to be elite, not seemingly more focused on being a power cute couple with Sierra. Flat out. His corny ass. His corny ass needs to work on his game. That's what the hell he needs to do. Because he sucked last year. Period. That's a disaster. And not surprisingly, as part of the disaster, Nathaniel Hackett, the first-year head coach, didn't even make it through all of year one. Like, you could tell it was going to be one of them years for the Broncos in week one. Remember the Monday night game against Seattle? And it's 4th and 5 late, and instead of trusting the quarterback that you gave all that money to and you gave up all that draft pick capital to bring in, you're going to try a 65-yard field goal instead of a 4th and 5? And then you ended up hiring a game management consultant or whatever the hell it was. Like, that's when you know you fucked up with the head coach. When you have to bring in somebody else to offload some of the actual head coaching responsibilities. Disaster. 5-12 after making the big trade for Russell Wilson. Disaster. Yeah. So not surprisingly, the Broncos were in a position heading into this 2023 season where they weren't quite poised to where they could just easily move on from Russell Wilson. That's about another year or two away where that could really be a conversation. And it's going to be a conversation in consideration. But instead they said, well, you know what? We got to do everything we can to try to make this work. So they go and swing a trade with the New Orleans Saints and bring in Shawn Payton to be the new head coach. I kind of find it an odd fit because I always think of Shawn Payton's system. And then I think about Russell Wilson and his game. I don't really see where they mesh very well. But, you know, Shawn Payton is a quality offensive mind. He's won a lot of games as an NFL head coach. He's a former Super Bowl champion, so he's got to be somebody that Russell Wilson will respect and listen to. But also Shawn Payton will establish that he's the fucking boss of the program. In and of itself, that is beneficial. That will be helpful. This was a big move for the Broncos. And they supplemented that in free agency by focusing a little bit on the offense where they could. They signed guard Ben Powers. They signed offensive tackle Mike McGlinchey. Look, those guys aren't world beaters, but they will improve their offensive line. That wasn't great last year. Bring in Samaje Perine to bring in some depth in the backfield, and then Zach Allen to be kind of like a key cog on their defensive line. Looking at the draft, they didn't have the first-round pick because of the Shawn Payton deal. They, then also the Russell Wilson deal, right? But they drafted Marvin Mims. You'd assume he's going to get, plenty of action as their third wide receiver. We'll see how Drew Sanders and Riley Moss fit into the defense. But the biggest deal of all for this Broncos team was bringing in a head coach that actually knows what the hell he's doing. Basically, the anti-Nathaniel Hackett. Anyways, when you look at strengths of the team, you're going to start with the offensive line, I think. I actually like the unit overall. Bowles at left tackle, McGlinchey at right tackle. You could do much worse than that. Miners and Powers at the guards. You get Cushenberry at center. I think as long as those guys stay healthy, you should be able to eliminate some of the offensive line isn't helping Russ excuses and put the pressure and the blame where it needs to be. It's just primarily on Russell Wilson. So I think that offensive line is a strength. I think the secondary is a strength. You've got Justin Simmons. You've got Patrick Surtain the second. Like, those are two impact difference makers in the back end of that defense. So that's a pretty good unit right there. And then, as I've talked about, is Shawn Payton. Shawn Payton is a massive upgrade over Nathaniel Hackett. Shawn Payton knows what he's doing. Now, you could question, hey, he was away from the game for a year. He doesn't have Drew Brees anymore. He's not in New Orleans. How's this going to work? It's a really fair question, right? But just on the surface of it, the head coach went from being arguably the biggest weakness on the team to one of its biggest strengths. In terms of things that I question about this Broncos team in 2023, I start with the running game. Their top two rushers are gone from last season. And I would assume Russell Wilson's not going to be running a ton in 2023 compared to his historical performance. So where's the team going to generate a running game from? Is Javonte Williams going to step up and have a big year as kind of the feature bell cow back? Defensively, I look at the pass rush. They traded away Bradley Chubb mid-year last year. This is a team that was 23rd in sacks, and you added Zach Allen, but I don't know that you added a whole lot else that's going to make a big splash here. They could still be a team that struggles to get after opposing quarterbacks this season. But the biggest question mark of all is Russell Wilson. He sucked last year. And it's really hoping and wishing and praying to expect him to be a whole lot better than suck right now. He was not good. Let it serve as a lesson for others. The hardest thing to find in the NFL is a franchise quarterback. If a team is looking to trade their franchise quarterback and he's only in their mid-30s, that should be a major red flag and warning sign that you don't want any part of that. You might want to believe and think that you know better than everybody else, but in reality, you don't. So don't do it. But, this is a big year for Russell Wilson. This is a legacy season for Russell Wilson. I really mean that. Because a couple of years ago, I was taking for granted, Russell Wilson will probably end up in the Hall of Fame someday. He has a second booty-ass year with the Broncos. All bets are off. All bets are off at that point. He's got to be better. He doesn't have to be a top 5 guy in the league. Although, if you're a Broncos fan, you probably want him to based off of the price that you paid to acquire him. But he does need to at least be a top 8 to 12 quarterback in 2023 for the Broncos to have any realistic shot. He can't be a bottom-tier quarterback like he was in 2022. Looking at the schedule for the Broncos, you see some opportunities here. Weeks 1 and 2, there's a chance for Shawn Payton and the Broncos to get off to a decent start. They host the Raiders and then they host the Commanders. Those are certainly two potentially winnable games there to start off the season. And if you want to institute a new program and build some confidence under Payton, get some confidence for Russell Wilson, that's a good place to start. Then you go in a couple weeks later, you start with this 4-game stretch between week 5 and week 8. You've got the Jets at home, at Kansas City, hosting Green Bay, hosting Kansas City. So you get Kansas City twice in a 3-week stretch. But there's another stretch right there. A tougher bit of stretch, but 3 of those 4 games are at home. That's another place that if the Broncos want to be in the mix for the playoffs, you got to take advantage of that there. And then a little later, weeks 11 through 13, they host Minnesota, host Cleveland, go to Houston. Those could all be winnable games. Look, I do think the Broncos are going to be better in 2023 just for no other reason of I don't know that Russell Wilson can suck much more than he did last year. And Shawn Payton is a hell of a lot better than Nathaniel Hackett. The challenge is trying to quantify how many more wins that's going to bring. It could bring this team from a 5-win team to a 10 or 11-win team. I'm going to kind of play the middle ground here. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. I think this team will finish 8-9 and 3rd in the division, but it will feel like progress even if it's not that exciting.